"You're not a real musician, just a kid pressing keys." My mom scoffed the night before my debut. I said, "Then don't expect a box seat at my big night." Next morning, I moved the inheritance and mailed her the concert program with a photo of the 12 empty boxes. 3 hours later, the calls began. They say a standing ovation is the highest honor a performer can get. I got mine in Prague, in a hall older than my country, with chandeliers like constellations and applause that shook the floor. But I didn't feel honored. I felt hollow. My name is Evan. I'm 23 years old, born and raised in a tiny town outside of Scranton, Pennsylvania. I've been playing piano since I was 6, ever since I found an old upright in a church basement and couldn't stop pressing the keys. I chased the dream no one believed in, all the way to Europe. And this concert, my debut solo performance at the redefining, was supposed to be the moment I finally proved them wrong. The music was perfect. I knew that. Every note landed. Every silence between the notes was deliberate, earned. The audience stood before I even lifted my hands from the final chord. But my eyes drifted, again and again, to the balcony boxes. 12 of them. Ornate. Cushioned. Gold placards etched with their names. Mom, Dan, my stepdad, Aunt Carol, Uncle Rick, cousins, even the neighbor who once told me I played real pretty. I paid for all of them. Flights. Hotel rooms. A luxury suite overlooking the river. Custom programs with their names in the dedication. Every seat was empty. At first, I told myself they were late. Maybe a taxi got stuck. Maybe they were waiting for the second half. But the second half came and went. And the boxes never filled. So I played for strangers. For the critics. For the conservatory professors and foreign dignitaries and older couples who leaned on each other and whispered, "He's got something." And while they cheered and clapped and whistled, I stared at the one box with the biggest placard. Family. 12 velvet seats, untouched. 12 little lamps, still dim. A single camera mounted on the box's ledge caught every second for the professional livestream I had arranged for them. They never even texted. I bowed 3 times. I smiled, because that's what you do. But behind my smile, I felt the same ache I'd carried since I was a boy. That maybe, just maybe, if I worked hard enough, they'd see me. I walked off stage to the sound of thunderous applause. The director gave me a hug. An old man kissed my hand. A music student asked for my autograph. But my eyes kept drifting to the box. That night, I walked through the quiet back halls of the concert hall, my polished shoes echoing off the marble. I reached the stage exit and stood there for a second, listening to the roar fade behind me. Then I stepped outside, into the cold air of Prague. Alone. I was 10 when I realized music made me feel different. Like I belonged somewhere, even if it wasn't here. We lived in a 2-bedroom ranch in Lackawanna County. Our street was lined with trucks on blocks, peeling paint, and flags that changed depending on who was mad at what. My stepdad Dan was a retired trucker with a gut like a keg and a voice like sandpaper. He wore the same beat-up Eagles hoodie year-round and believed in 3 things: beer, the Steelers, and hard work. Music, in his words, was for rich kids and fairies. He hated the piano. Finger nonsense, he'd mutter anytime I practiced. Real men work with their hands, not twiddle them over keys like a damn ballerina. At first, I tried to play quieter. Then I tried to play better. Neither helped. When I won 2nd place in the state junior recital at 11, he said, "Bet the winner was rich, huh?" Mom wasn't much better. She'd sit at the kitchen table filing her nails, sighing loud enough for the whole trailer park to hear. "Evan, no offense," she once told me after a school concert, "but you trying to be better than where you came from? That's just gonna hurt you in the long run." I was 12. Every time I got an award, they found a way to minimize it. Must have been a small contest. Judges probably felt bad for you. "Don't get a big head, Evan. You ain't Carnegie Hall." I practiced anyway. I'd sneak into the community center to play the out-of-tune upright. I'd play on cardboard cutouts of keys when I couldn't find a piano. I stole Wi-Fi from the neighbor to download sheet music. It became an obsession, not for success, but for proof. That I mattered. That I was worth something. The only one who ever really got it was Aunt Carol. She was Mom's older sister and practically raised me till I was 8. She used to take me to the library for music CDs and help me build a keyboard out of cereal boxes and masking tape. She'd call me my little Mozart and let me play hymns on her electric organ. But as I got older, even she shifted. I was 15 when I asked if she'd come to my chamber recital. She smiled soft, but looked away. "Don't expect too much from folks like us, baby," she said. "We're not built for all that." All that. That was the phrase they used for anything I loved. Piano, books, Europe, scholarships. Classical music was all that. So was ambition. I learned not to share my wins. By the time I was 17, I stopped inviting them to recitals. They didn't come anyway. When I got a full ride to the conservatory in Prague, Dan said, "Figures." They'll take anyone now. Mom called it a snob factory. I left home with 2 suitcases and my grandfather's old watch. He was the only one who ever looked at my hands and said, "Those aren't soft hands. Those are hands built for something bigger." But he'd been gone for 5 years. And the rest of them? They just watched me go. No hug. No pride. Just a shrug from Dan and a reminder to stay humble. $10,000. That's how much I spent trying to prove I still mattered to them. That's how much it cost to find out the truth. I used the last of my grandfather's inheritance, money he'd left me in a tin lockbox with a note that said, "Build something beautiful." He always said I played like the world was listening. He never got to hear me perform in Europe, but I like to think he would have worn a suit and cried the moment I hit the first chord. Instead, I spent that money on the people who never asked to hear me play at all. 12 luxury box seats at the redefining. I had their names engraved on little gold plates that matched the balcony trim. A lakeview suite at a hotel that cost more per night than our mortgage back home ever did. Prepaid dinner reservations. Limousine service. Custom welcome baskets with guidebooks, scarves, and a handwritten letter for each of them. Yes, even Dan. It was going to be a reunion. A chance for all the no-shows, the missed birthdays, the dismissive comments to mean less. I thought maybe, in a foreign city where no one was watching, they could be different. I kept picturing my mom's face when she saw the concert hall. The tear in Aunt Carol's eye when she heard the opening notes. I imagined Dan, slouched but quiet, the way men get when something humbles them. The night before the concert, I sat in the hotel lobby with their gift bags beside me, still hopeful. I kept checking the group text, titled "Family in Prague, waiting for a photo." Just landed. Anything. At 8:42 p.m., a message finally lit up my phone. "Dan, we're skipping the boring piano thing. Booked a cruise instead. Have fun pretending." I read it twice. Thought maybe it was a joke. Then came another. "Mom, rather be someplace fun than snoozing at some snob fest. You always like showing off." Then silence. I stared at my phone like it had personally betrayed me. My fingers went numb. The concierge asked if I was okay. I nodded and smiled like my chest wasn't folding in on itself. I wanted to scream, or throw the phone across the marble floor. But instead, I just sat there, surrounded by welcome baskets and printed programs with blank spaces where their name should have meant something. They weren't coming. Not one of them. Not even Aunt Carol. I went up to my room, sat on the bed, and stared out the window at the city. The Charles Bridge glittered in the distance. Prague was glowing. The whole world was watching, except the people who should have been in the front row. The next morning, I still got dressed like they were there. I wore the navy suit I saved for years to buy. I carried myself like they were watching. And that night, I played like it was my last chance to be heard. Because maybe, in a way, it was. After the concert, I didn't go to the reception. I didn't linger for the handshakes or the praise or the offers from professors who suddenly wanted to mentor me. I left through the back hallway, the one used by janitors and lighting crew, and walked out into the cold night with my coat half-buttoned and my concert shoes echoing off the cobblestones. The adrenaline had worn off. Now came the part they don't teach you in conservatory, the part where the curtain drops and no one's waiting in the wings. I walked alone to the apartment I'd rented on the 3rd floor of an old brick building near the river. The radiator clanked like it was protesting life. The kitchen light flickered every time I opened the fridge. But it was mine. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and stood in the middle of the room, still in my suit. I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel accomplished. I felt like I'd been robbed, like someone had snuck into my life and stolen the joy before I could claim it. Eventually, I moved. Took the extra concert program, the one I'd saved for Mom, and slipped it into a frame. Then I pulled out the photo I had taken from the stage before the crowd arrived, a panoramic shot of the luxury box seats, all 12 of them, completely empty. I framed that too. It wasn't for spite. It wasn't for revenge. I just needed to see it. I needed something to remind me of what I already knew but hadn't wanted to admit. They were never going to show up. They hadn't for recitals. They hadn't for scholarships. They hadn't when I left for Prague with 2 bags and a dream. And they sure as hell weren't going to now. I sat down at my little desk, stared at my computer screen, and opened my bank account. The numbers glowed against the darkroom. Just over $12,000 left, every penny from my grandfather's inheritance. I'd kept it in a joint account all these years, just in case my mom needed something urgent. She used to call it our little family fund. But it wasn't family money anymore. It was mine. My grandfather's words came back to me like a whisper, build a life that can't be ignored. So I made a decision. Click. I opened a new account. Click. Transferred the entire balance. Click. Closed the joint one. Then I sat back, the glow of the screen still in my eyes, and whispered into the empty apartment. No more pretending. The next morning, I walked to the bank in a light drizzle with my scarf tucked up to my nose. It felt like walking through someone else's city, clean, quiet, too polite to ask what was wrong. I showed my passport and signed the final paperwork. The teller, A young guy with bright eyes and a nose ring smiled at me like I was opening a savings account for a vacation. But what I was really doing was shutting a door. I moved every cent out of the old joint account. That was the account my mother used to dip into when she needed a little help, when Dan's truck broke down or Aunt Carol's roof leaked or someone's credit card hit the limit again. It was also the account she once called our future. She told everyone she was saving that money for something important, like remodeling the kitchen. This place is falling apart, she had said a dozen times. And when Evan makes it big, he'll help us out, right? I never said no. That was my problem. But now, sitting in that leather chair across from the banker, I said no without saying a word. Afterward, I walked to the post office and spent an absurd amount of money to overnight a gold-wrapped package to Pennsylvania. Inside was a copy of the concert program, perfectly folded, and the framed photo of the empty family box seats. Nothing else. No letter. No note. Just silence in a box. It arrived 3 days later. And 3 hours after that, the voicemails began. First was Mom. She cried through the entire thing. I could barely make out the words. Why would you do this? She sobbed. That money wasn't just yours, Evan. It was for all of us. You knew that. Then Dan. You little shit, he growled. We counted on that money. You think just because you can press some keys you're better than your own family. Then Aunt Carol, her voice tight and tired. Evan, honey, what's going on? Your mom's a wreck. This isn't like you. I didn't respond to any of them. They didn't ask why the box was empty. They didn't ask how the concert went. They didn't ask if I was okay. All they wanted to know was where the money went. Funny how fast they remembered I existed once the bank account didn't. For years, I thought their indifference was emotional. Now I realized it was transactional. As long as I was sending money, I was tolerated. Useful. Safe. But the second I used it for myself, I became a problem. So I became a problem. That night, I poured myself a glass of cheap red wine, sat at my tiny kitchen table, and scrolled through the last voicemail again. You can't just cut us off, my mother had said, her voice shaking. You're part of this family. That inheritance was for all of us. You're being cruel. Cruel. That was the word she used. I looked at the framed photo of the box seats. All 12, perfectly empty. Then I whispered, almost amused, that's rich. A week after the concert, I sat across from Tobias in a little cafe near the Vltava River. It was the kind of place with wobbly tables, chipped mugs, and chairs that creaked louder than the espresso machine. But the cinnamon rolls were warm, and the windows fogged up just enough to make the world outside feel far away. Tobias stirred his coffee absently while I slid the manila envelope across the table. He looked at it, then looked at me. What's this? My new paperwork, I said. Emergency contact. Medical proxy. Beneficiary. All of it. His eyebrows rose, but he didn't touch the envelope. You sure? I nodded. I'm sure. He blinked a few times. Swallowed. You didn't have to. I know. I sipped my coffee and waited a second. But I wanted to. Tobias had flown in from Germany for the concert. Paid for his own train, booked a hostel on the edge of the city, showed up in a wrinkled shirt and a borrowed tie. He was the only one in the crowd who stood before the final note finished. The only one who didn't clap out of politeness, but out of pride. Back in school, he used to stay up until 2 in the morning just to run through my etudes with me before juries. He was the one who found me crying in the practice room after my first family no-show and said, let them miss out. We won't. So now, I chose him. This is me, I said, tapping the envelope gently, choosing you as my real family. Tobias didn't say anything, just stared at the papers like they were glowing. Then, slowly, he nodded. His eyes shimmered, but he didn't let a tear fall. He just reached across the table and covered my hand with his. You've always been my family, he said, his voice low and rough. Even before this. We sat in silence for a while after that. No rush. No pressure. Just two friends in a quiet corner of Prague, reshaping what family meant without anyone else's permission. Later, as we walked back toward the tram, he bumped my shoulder lightly and said, so, what's next? I looked out at the river. Something that can't be ignored. 2 weeks later, I heard a knock at my apartment door. Not a buzz. Not a polite tap. A knock, the kind that came with weight, with nerve. I opened it slowly, and there they were. My mother stood in a too-thin coat, arms crossed, mascara smudged like she'd cried and then made sure I noticed. Dan stood beside her, hands shoved in his pockets, chewing the inside of his cheek like he was holding back from exploding. Evan, she said, like it was the start of a sentence she didn't want to finish. We need to talk. I didn't move. Didn't open the door wider. Just stood there, hand on the knob, waiting. Dan was the one who stepped forward first. You changed the account, he said flatly. Took everything. It was mine, I said. Always was. My mother's voice trembled. You blindsided us. You should have talked to us first. We didn't think. Exactly, I cut in. You didn't think. Her face twisted. We didn't think it'd matter that much. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I'd been waiting for them to say it out loud. You didn't think it'd matter? I repeated. You skipped my debut concert. You took the cruise instead. Then you mocked it in a group chat. She flinched. Dan stepped in. We're family. You don't just lock us out of something that belonged to all of us. I tilted my head. You think the inheritance was yours? He didn't blink. Your grandfather helped us too. He lived with us. He supported this family. That money was for everyone. By family right. Family right, I muttered. That's rich, coming from the man who called my music finger nonsense. His jaw clenched. You abandoned me at the peak, I said. The one night in my life that actually meant something. I paid for your seats. Your hotel. The dinner you never showed up to. I left space for you in the front row of my future. My voice rose, cracking just a little. And you chose sunbathing. Dan stepped forward, face reddening. Don't twist it. We didn't know it meant that much to you. I held up the framed concert photo. The one with all 12 empty seats, perfectly lit. I shouldn't have had to explain it. You were supposed to be there. You weren't. My mother started crying again. We didn't mean to hurt you. But you did. I took a breath, then stepped back, holding the door with one hand. This visit, I said quietly, it isn't love. It's loss. You didn't come here for me. You came for the money. You only care now that it's gone. Dan tried to speak, but I shook my head. Too late. Then I closed the door. I stood there behind it for a long moment, listening to the shuffle of feet, the murmur of retreat, the heavy silence of people who finally realized they had nothing left to bargain with. They left without another word. And this time, I didn't watch them go. The next day, the fallout started. It didn't come as a scream. It came as a slow, steady erasure. First, I noticed the group chat, Turner Family Updates, was gone from my phone. Not muted. Not archived. Deleted. Then the cousins. One by one, they stopped liking my posts. Stopped commenting. Unfriended. Unfollowed. Disappeared like smoke through a cracked window. I wasn't surprised. I'd been the odd one out since I chose sonatas over Sunday barbecues. But even the ones I used to help, like Julie, who I'd coached through her music school auditions, or Brian, who I'd loaned money to after he wrecked his car, they didn't reach out. Not a word. According to a message Tobias showed me, one that someone accidentally forwarded him, my name had been recast. Selfish. Cold. Full of himself. Thinks he's better than the rest of us. They made it sound like I'd exiled myself for no reason. Like I turned my back on a perfectly loving family. But they never mentioned the empty box seats. Or the cruise photos. Or the group chat that mocked my concert. They never mentioned the truth. And that's fine. Let them talk. I didn't flinch. Not this time. Instead, I filled the silence with music. I started spending more hours in my studio apartment, not because I was hiding, but because I was building. I practiced more than I slept. I wrote new pieces. I taught a few lessons online to kids from towns that sounded like mine, kids with big talent and no support. I hung the concert photo in my home studio, right above the piano. 12 empty seats. A full house beyond them. It reminded me of two things: who didn't show up, and who did. And more importantly, who I was building this for now. One afternoon, after wrapping up a lesson with a teenage girl from rural Kansas who played Chopin like her hands were possessed, I stared at my notebook and wrote something in the margin. Music for the forgotten. It stuck. Within a month, I had a plan. A name. A mission. I used the rest of the inheritance, what I hadn't already moved, to file paperwork for a traveling music collective. Something for kids like me. Kids whose parents thought music was a waste. Kids who practiced in secret and hoped someone would hear them one day. We'd bring donated instruments to rural schools. Offer workshops, pop-up recitals, and community concerts in places that classical music never touched. I called it the Empty Seat Collective. Because sometimes the people who don't show up teach you more than the ones who do. And the best revenge wasn't success. It was building something so meaningful that even silence had to make room for it. 3 years passed. Long enough to stop checking for their names in my inbox. Long enough for the pain to go quiet, to lose its sharpness and settle into something dull and manageable, like an old scar I only felt when it rained. I had built a life. The Empty Seat Collective had grown. We'd held concerts in abandoned churches, community centers, and high school gyms. Kids who'd never seen a violin before were now leading string quartets. I'd been featured in 2 national interviews and had recently signed a small deal to compose for a short film. I wasn't rich, but I was free. And for the first time in my life, I felt claimed, not by a family, but by a purpose. Then one afternoon, as I sorted through the mail on my apartment floor, I found it. A heavy white envelope with my full name in cursive across the front. No return address. Just a faint scent of perfume I hadn't smelled in years. Inside was an invitation. Uncle Rick's 75th birthday. Sunday, June 12, 3 p.m. Turner Family Pavilion, Lake Crest, PA. At the bottom, written in a smaller, unfamiliar hand. P.S. Your mom says she misses you. I stared at it for a while, unsure what emotion I was supposed to feel. Anger? Curiosity? Regret? I didn't feel anything. Not yet. Then, 2 days later, a second envelope arrived. Smaller. Thinner. No card. Just a letter. Evan, I know I don't deserve to ask for anything from you. I know I said things I can never take back, and worse, I didn't say the things that mattered. I should have been there. For the concert. For all of it. I was wrong. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just hope I can see my son again. Mom. The handwriting was shaky. Careful. Like she had practiced the letter 3 times before writing it out for real. I read it once. Then again. Then I walked over to the frame that hung above my piano. The photo of the empty box seats still sat there, untouched. A monument to what wasn't. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just placed her letter on the shelf next to it. The two belonged together now. The letter, with its trembling apology. The photo, with its quiet truth. And I stood there for a long time, staring at both. Then I made a decision. Not out of rage. Not out of longing. Just something quieter. A kind of peace that looked a lot like distance. I didn't wear a suit. Didn't shave. Didn't do my hair the way Mom used to beg me to. I wore black jeans, a clean shirt, and a jacket Tobias had given me for my last birthday, simple, comfortable, mine. The drive to Lake Crest was long, but familiar. I'd taken it 100 times before. Every pothole and billboard reminded me of younger versions of myself, always hoping this trip home would be different. It never was. When I pulled up to the pavilion, the gravel lot was already half full. Balloons. Streamers. Kids with juice boxes darting between lawn chairs. From the outside, it looked like any other family gathering, easy, harmless. But I wasn't here for a reunion. I was here for an ending. I stepped out of the car and walked slowly toward the building. No one noticed me at first. A few heads turned, then turned again with surprise. Murmurs spread like wine through tall grass. Then she saw me. My mother. She was sitting on a bench near the front, talking to Aunt Carol. Her hair was grayer now, thinner at the edges. Her eyes met mine, and in that split second, all the years collapsed into the space between us. She stood, slowly. Her hands trembled as she smoothed her blouse. Evan, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I walked the last few feet and handed her something, a folded brochure. She opened it, her fingers shaking. It was for the Empty Seat Collective. A full-color printout with photos of kids playing cello in a gym, of me at a community piano surrounded by smiling faces, of a banner that read, "Everyone deserves a seat." She looked up, tears already brimming. "This is what I built," I said softly. "Without you." She blinked hard. Her mouth opened, then closed again. No excuses. No defense. Just silence. And honestly, that was all I needed. Behind me, Tobias waited by the car, 2 coffees in hand. He didn't wave. Didn't call out. Just stood there present, quiet, steady, as he'd always been. I turned back to her one last time. "You missed the moment," I said. But I didn't. Then I walked away. Tobias handed me my coffee as I got in the car. No words. He knew better. As we pulled out of the lot, I glanced once in the rearview mirror. She was still standing there, holding the brochure like it might disappear if she blinked too hard. And then I looked forward. Toward the road. Toward whatever came next. The rearview mirror shrank behind me, smaller and smaller until it was nothing. Just like the box seats had been. Just like the ache had been. Just like the version of me who used to beg to be seen. Gone.